Homeless black veteran saves child. Racist crowd turned silent when truth revealed. The summer sun beat down on Maplewood like a warning. It was the kind of heat that melted the pavement just enough to make your soul stick when you walked. Maplewood, a town of manicured lawns and polite smiles, existed in a hush of routine and measured distance. The people nodded when they passed each other, waved without really seeing, and clung to comfort like it was currency. There, near the edge of all this curated normalcy, sat a man no one really saw. He was part of the background, like the cracked sidewalk or the rusted bench he favored. He looked to be in his 50s, though the wear on his face suggested more. His skin was a deep, weathered brown, his cheeks shadowed by stubble that had grayed unevenly. His posture sagged slightly, his back curved with the weight of years spent outside the embrace of walls. He wore a faded army jacket with threadbare sleeves and boots whose soles had kissed too many rough roads. Most people didn't know his name. They didn't ask. To them, he was a fixture without context, a presence to avoid. Some called him Ghost, said he drifted in years ago and never left. Others were less generous. They muttered words like trouble or addict or worse. They crossed the street when they saw him, clutched their purses tighter, nudged their children to stay close and keep moving. Parents whispered warnings behind their hands. A local shopkeeper even posted a laminated sign near the door. Loiterers will be reported. The unspoken message was clearer than the ink on paper. You are not wanted. But the man never caused harm. He never begged. He never spoke. Each morning, before the shops opened and the sidewalks filled with chatter, he swept the streets with a broken broom he had found in the alley behind the pharmacy. He picked up candy wrappers, empty coffee cups, lost receipts. He carried a grocery bag and filled it with trash that was never his. It was his ritual, perhaps a memory of order, perhaps the only part of his life that still made sense. At night, he would roll out a blanket beside the bench near the old bus station, under a flickering streetlight that buzzed like an old memory trying to be remembered. The light gave just enough glow to see the shadows of his hands as he laced his fingers together and stared at the stars. He never drank. He never shouted. He simply was. No one seemed to notice the limp in his left leg, the way he went slightly with every other step. No one looked closely enough to see the faint outline of a U.S. Army insignia still sewn onto his jacket, frayed and barely clinging to the fabric. No one ever wondered why a man would sleep beside a bench instead of in a bed. And if anyone did, they didn't ask. Then came the 4th of July. The town square transformed almost overnight. Red, white, and blue streamers were strung between lampposts. Small flags stuck out of every flower pot. Folding chairs and picnic blankets claimed patches of grass as early as sunrise. Vendors arrived with carts full of funnel cake and hot dogs. Children darted between the legs of parents and neighbors, faces sticky with ice cream and excitement. Patriotic music crackled through cheap speakers that had been mounted to the sides of the temporary stage. There was laughter and shouting, and the smell of grilled meat curling through the humid air. It was celebration by the book. He watched it all from his usual place, just outside the circle of cheer. He sat beneath the shade of a tree, his jacket still on despite the heat, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned a movement, not out of judgment but out of habit. Observation had become survival. A little girl with braids and a flag painted on her cheek pointed toward him and tugged her mother's hand. "Why is that man dirty?" The mother turned, saw him, and immediately pulled her daughter close, her voice sharp but hushed. "Do not look at him. He's probably dangerous." The man heard. He always did. He lowered his eyes. There was a time when fireworks meant danger. A time when loud noises in the dark signaled incoming rounds, not freedom. Back then, he was needed, respected, called by name. Now, he was a shadow people whispered about and wished away. As the sun began to dip below the rooftops, families gathered closer to the pond in the park. It was artificial but still beautiful in the golden hour, the water calm and reflecting the colors of the sky. A small wooden platform had been set up nearby where local musicians had played earlier. Now it stood empty, waiting for the fireworks to begin. Children climbed on rocks and railings despite half-hearted warnings from their parents. The noise grew as the excitement swelled. People laughed louder. Someone set off a small firecracker too early and drew a few cheers and a few scowls. The man remained still. He watched the chaos with the quiet calm of someone who had seen worse. Much worse. Then his eyes caught something. A boy. Blonde hair. Red shirt. Maybe 6 years old. The boy had broken away from the crowd and now stood at the edge of the pond, arms out like wings, pretending to be an airplane. He leaned forward, balancing on the balls of his feet, giggling to himself. The man's shoulders tensed. His eyes narrowed. Something was off. There was no adult nearby. The boy was too close to the edge. Then it happened. The boy's foot slipped. His small body jerked forward and vanished into the water. There was a single scream, a sharp, cutting sound that sliced through the noise. Then silence. Not because it was quiet, but because no one moved. The crowd froze. Time seemed to splinter. Parents looked around in confusion. Some gasped. Others covered their mouths. But no one ran. No one jumped. No one dove. Except him. The man who had swept their streets. The man they called Ghost. The man they warned their children about. His jacket hit the ground before the scream had even faded. His legs moved without hesitation. His limp forgotten, his pain irrelevant. He ran toward the pond and jumped. The pond erupted in chaos as ripples expanded outward from where the child had fallen. For a moment, it was only noise. Screams and gasps and the desperate thrashing of small limbs. The boy's arms slapped the surface wildly before slipping beneath the water. Then there was only the frantic ripple of bubbles and the silence of a stunned crowd that could not yet move. His mother's scream cut through the stillness like a blade. Her voice rose above the murmurs and cries as she pushed through the gathered onlookers. Her hands flailed against bodies too slow to make space. Her words cracked with panic as she cried out for her son. Jason. She screamed his name again and again as if repetition might summon him from the dark. But no one moved. Parents held their children tighter. Teenagers raised their phones, some live streaming, others too shocked to lower their screens. A few shouted for help, but their feet remained glued to the ground. Everyone was waiting for someone else. Anyone else. But no one stepped forward. Then came movement. Quiet. Unseen by most at first. From the edge of the crowd, a blanket fell to the ground. The homeless man stood, his jacket soaked with age and wear, his body stiff but purposeful. He took one step forward, then another, limping with the weight of memory in every stride. Some in the crowd pulled their children back. A woman gasped and whispered to her husband. Others frowned, uncertain of his intentions. He said nothing. He shrugged off his jacket and tossed it aside, revealing a thin frame marked by time and hardship. His boots struck the shallow edge of the pond and sent up a small splash. Then he waded in, without hesitation, without pause. The water climbed up his legs as he moved deeper. His steps quickened until the depth took him, and then he swam, strong and precise. The limp was gone now, lost beneath the surface. What remained was the ghost of a soldier, the echo of discipline and duty honed in another life. The boy's small form bobbed beneath the water. His arms were still, his face unseen. With a burst of speed, the man reached him. He wrapped one arm firmly around the child's chest and turned, kicking hard. Every movement was a memory, every stroke a command obeyed from battles long past. He swam against the weight of water and judgment, against the gravity of years spent forgotten. When he reached the edge, his muscles burned and his chest heaved. But his grip remained firm. He lifted the boy with both hands and placed him on the shore, with a mother collapsed beside him, gathering the child into her trembling arms. The boy coughed violently, water spilling from his mouth. His eyes fluttered open. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. The mother sobbed. Relief and terror tangled in her voice. She whispered her son's name again and again, cradling him like she feared the world might try to take him again. The man stood, soaked from head to toe, the water dripping from his sleeves and pooling at his feet. He watched the boy in silence, his own breath short and labored. But then came a shift. A murmur from the crowd. A man's voice rose above the whispers. Who let that guy near the kid? Another shouted, he's always been off. I knew he'd snap one day. Heads turned. Faces changed. Gratitude twisted into suspicion. People stepped back, not closer. Some reached for phones again, now not to capture a rescue, but to document a threat. Then the police arrived. A uniformed officer pushed through the gathering, his hand resting on his belt as if expecting resistance. His gaze found the homeless man and narrowed. His voice was stern, practiced. "We got a call. Reports say someone grabbed a child near the pond." The man stood still. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. Another officer flanked the first, stepping forward with caution. "Sir, we need you to step away from the child." The veteran did not resist. He gave a small nod, a familiar motion. Not defiant, not fearful, just obedient. A soldier's nod, one born from orders, followed without question. But the silence was broken by another voice. It came from an older woman near the back of the crowd. Her skin was dark, her dress floral, and her hands clutched a large purse. She stepped forward slowly, but with purpose. Her voice trembled at first, but when she spoke again, it rang with iron. "Do any of you even know who that man is?" The crowd paused. I turned to her. "His name is Marcus Dillard, Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army. He saved 6 men in Fallujah, took a bullet in his hip. They gave him a medal and then sent him home with nothing." A hush swept over the group like a cold wind. Whispers rippled. Skepticism fought curiosity. The woman dug into her purse and pulled out a laminated piece of paper. A photograph, yellowed at the edges. She handed it to the officer closest to her. "I keep this with me, because he once saved my cousin too, back when no one else would." The officer unfolded the paper. The image showed a younger man in uniform, standing straight, eyes forward, saluting the flag. Beneath the photo, a headline read, "Local hero returns from war." The silence grew heavier. Someone muttered under their breath, "No way." Another stepped closer to the officer, peering at the article. "My God," someone whispered. Then something shifted in air. It was subtle. A pulling back of fear. A loosening of suspicion. People who had drawn their children close now looked at Marcus with unease replaced by a flicker of shame. The mother still knelt beside her child, her eyes darting between the man who had saved him and the crowd around her. Her voice came quiet now. Not cold. Not yet warm. "You saved him." Marcus gave a small nod. Then he turned, gathering his jacket from the ground and draping it over his arm. He began to walk away. Slowly. With the same limp that had marked his every day in town. The same limp that had told a story no one wanted to hear until today. But now people watched him differently. A father lowered his phone and looked at his own son, who had stopped recording and now stared at the retreating figure with wide eyes. The officer folded the article and handed it back to the woman. Then he looked at his partner. Neither spoke. The celebration had not resumed. The music had stopped. The flag still fluttered, but the town square felt altered, like something long buried had surfaced. Marcus walked toward the bus station bench where he had always sat. He laid the blanket back down. He sat, the same as before. But for the first time in years, people did not look away. Some still whispered, others stared, but something else had taken root. Not yet gratitude, not yet respect, but perhaps the first crack in the wall of indifference. And somewhere beside the flickering streetlight that buzzed like a tired memory, the man they called Ghost breathed quietly and watched the stars emerge over Maplewood. Morning came with a quiet not often felt in that part of town. The bench where Marcus had sat for months was empty now. For those who passed by on their way to work or school or nowhere in particular, something felt off, like a page had been torn from a book they had never bothered to read until yesterday. But today the chapter mattered. The folded American flag on the seat glowed under the first rays of sun, its colors soft but proud. Next to it, a small brass key caught the light. There was no note, no explanation. Just a symbol. A shift. The bus station felt less like a place to avoid and more like the start of something people weren't sure how to name yet. The morning crowd moved slower than usual, not because they were late, but because they kept glancing at the bench, wondering what had changed and why it took so long. Word traveled fast in a town that once ignored its own shadows. The story made local headlines, then national ones. Phones buzzed with links to the footage. Social media lit up with images of Marcus drenched in river water, holding the boy as the crowd watched. Headlines followed. Homeless veteran saves child while town watches. Forgotten hero. What happens when we finally see? Some people cried. Others got angry. A few said nothing at all but showed up the next morning with coffee or clean socks or a sandwich packed with care. It wasn't always graceful. Some didn't know how to look him in the eye. Others offered help and tripped over their words. But Marcus never asked for grace. Only recognition. And perhaps peace. The mayor called a press conference 3 days later. It was held outside City Hall, flanked by flags and guarded by silence. Marcus stood near the back at first, unsure of the spotlight. He had spent too long becoming invisible to feel comfortable being seen. The mayor stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and spoke with a weight that hadn't been there before. We are here today to honor a man who should have never been forgotten. Sergeant First Class Marcus Dillard served this country with courage and sacrifice. He saved lives on the battlefield and again on our riverbank. We failed him. But today we begin to make that right. There was applause. Hesitant at first, then steady, then thunderous. The town council awarded Marcus the key to the city. The mayor handed him a plaque. But it was the handshake that mattered most. The kind that didn't flinch. The kind that said, I see you. I respect you. I'm sorry. Later that week, the town arranged housing for Marcus, a modest apartment near the library, with a view of the park. It wasn't grand, but it was warm. It had a bed, a shower, a door he could lock. On the first night, he sat on a balcony, watching kids run past, laughter trailing behind them like wind. He breathed. On the 4th of July, something happened that no one expected. The town invited Marcus to stand on stage during the ceremony. He had declined at first, unsure if the spotlight had room for a man like him. But the letters from children changed his mind. Crayon drawings of rivers and flags. Thank you notes in shaky handwriting. A little boy named Jason had drawn himself with a cape and labeled Marcus as hero number 1. So on the morning of the celebration, Marcus put on a clean shirt. He shaved. He opened an old box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were medals, one slightly bent, another polished from fingers that used to hold them tighter. He pinned them on and looked in the mirror. The reflection looked older, yes, but the eyes were steady. When he arrived, the crowd parted for him without hesitation. Not out of fear this time, but reverence. People nodded. Some offered small waves. The same folks who once avoided his eyes now met them head-on. He stepped onto the stage as the brass band began the national anthem. Flags waved. Hands rose to hearts. But more than that, heads turned to face him. Not the sky. Not the symbols. Him. The mayor gave a short speech, but mostly stepped aside. Marcus looked out at the crowd. He didn't say much. Just enough. I served because I believed in something bigger than myself. I saved that boy because someone had to. I don't need parades. I just want people to remember what service means. Not just on battlefields, but in neighborhoods, on sidewalks, and how we treat each other. That's the real flag. That's the real freedom. There was no thunderous applause. Not yet. Just stillness. And then a single clap from the front row. A child's hand. Jason. He sat on his mother's lap, wearing a tiny blazer and holding a toy soldier. On the chest of the figure was written in bold black marker, Sergeant Dillard. Then came the applause. Wave after wave. Not forced. Not polite. Genuine. People stood. Some cried. The silence that once smothered the edges of Marcus's life was gone, replaced by something fuller. Something earned. After the ceremony, children ran up to him. One asked if he had really been a soldier. Another offered him a drawing. He smiled, knelt down, and said softly, I was a soldier. Still am in some ways. But the biggest battle is making sure we see each other. The mother approached then, holding Jason by the hand. She didn't look away this time. Her eyes were clear, voice steady. I judged you before I knew you. I'm sorry. You saved my baby. I owe you more than thanks. Marcus nodded. You don't owe me. Just pay it forward. That's how we fix things. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the town square, Marcus stood a little straighter. Not because the medals were heavy, but because the weight had shifted. From shame to honor. From exile to belonging. Later that evening, back in his apartment, he sat by the window and watched the fireworks. They bloomed in the sky like memories, each burst a reminder of where he had been and where he was now. He didn't need a stage. He didn't need applause. He only needed what he had finally received, not charity, not pity, but truth. Recognition. And maybe that was enough to start again. In the apartment next door, someone began to play the piano. A slow tune, soft and thoughtful. Marcus listened for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. Outside, Jason stood on the sidewalk below, looking up, waving. Marcus raised his hand in return. This time the town saw him. Not as a shadow, not as a stranger, but as a man. And they never looked away again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. We share inspiring and powerful stories like this one every week, and we'd love for you to be part of our community. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.